Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Milwaukee Planning Commission. Agendas and additional copies of staff reports are available on the table in the hall. If you've not picked up an agenda, please do so. It contains important information about the process. If you wish to be included in the mailing list for a decision, please add your name and contact information to the sign-up list located on the table in the hallway. We will follow the basic format listed on the back of the agenda. We may vary from the process based on circumstances of the hearing, but we don't have a hearing. So next on the agenda is, I actually don't have an agenda. Do we have minutes?
No, I don't think you do.
I don't think we have minutes to review.
Sorry, okay. So then next is informational items.
Just a few things that you've probably already been reminded of, but I'll do it again. And further work on the comp plan upcoming. We've got the next CPAC meeting is Monday the 3rd. It's a busy week next week. Followed by our housing forum on the 5th. That hopefully will 6th. Why did I write 5th? It's the 6th, Thursday the 6th. So hopefully everybody will be able to attend. And then in 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to have a debrief with the council, the CPAC, and the DLC over at the Public Safety Building. So Planning Commission will not be holding a regular meeting that night. We'll just be meeting jointly with the council and those other groups. And hopefully we'll also touch on the neighborhood hub concept at that meeting, as well as the housing forum. So I think that's all I've got.
Okay. All right. Next is audience participation. This is an opportunity to comment on items not on tonight's agenda. If you wish to comment on an item that is on the agenda, there will be a time for comments after the presentation. Does anyone wish to comment on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? Okay. All right, then we'll move into work session items. Climate Action Plan update with Peter.
Good evening. I'm Peter Passarelli. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Milwaukee, and tonight we're going to give you a little bit of an update on our Climate Action Plan. With me here tonight is Natalie Rogers. Natalie is our Climate Action and Sustainability Coordinator. She's been with us 3 weeks now?
3.5.
3.5. 3.5 weeks. 3.5 busy weeks. And she's gonna give you a presentation tonight and talk about our Climate Action Plan. So. Oops. There we go.
Okay, hi, I'm Natalie. So as Peter mentioned, I'm the Climate Action and Sustainability Coordinator. I'm really excited to work with all of you, and I just wanted to share a little bit of information about how the Climate Action Plan relates to the Planning Committee, as well as just a little bit about where we are in the process right now. So, as many of you probably know, climate change is coming to the Pacific Northwest. While the world in general is going to be facing a lot of the repercussions in a more severe form, the Pacific Northwest is still, and specifically Milwaukee, is going to be facing a lot of impacts from climate change, including increased wildfire impacts. So by 2040, we're actually expecting to see a 400 to 500% increase in acreage in Oregon of wildfires. We're going to be seeing much hotter summers. By 2100, they actually say it's 10 to 12% degree increase in temperatures, lower water volumes, higher flooding risks. So by sea level rise, the Willamette itself is going to rise, and we're going to be seeing higher flood risks here in Milwaukee. And then continued population growth. So because the Pacific Northwest is going to be somewhat of a shelter to the impacts of climate change, we are likely going to see a lot more population migration into the area, meaning that there's going to be particular planning challenges as well as any development challenges in the region. So where does Milwaukee stand right now in climate change, and what carbon are we putting out into the climate? So Milwaukee's 2016 carbon footprint is shown here, and it's totaling to about 520,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, meaning that this includes other greenhouse gases such as methane, but it's going to be put into a carbon equivalent for graphic purposes and for data understanding. So as you can see, about half of Milwaukee's 2016 carbon, 2016, I'm going to let Peter control that. 2016 carbon output was from produced and consumed here in Milwaukee. So that includes stuff like waste, refrigerant loss, transportation, and building energy. About half of the emissions were also from things occurring outside of Milwaukee. So that's imported goods. Think about when you buy stuff from Amazon, that's the goods itself that's made outside of Milwaukee, as well as the transportation it took to get it within the city limits. Go ahead and go. And so Milwaukee is taking climate action, and we're going to be developing a lot of outreach strategies, but we also developed the climate action plan. So the goal of Milwaukee's climate action plan and climate action goals include creating a stronger local economy through promoting local businesses and renewable energy and other climate actions, taking care of those who might be struggling. So a lot of communities are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, and so we want to be out there and helping assist those communities change in the coming years. Preserving what we love about Milwaukee. So a lot of climate actions relate to recreational activities and outdoor spaces. So we want to make sure we preserve Milwaukee's essence while allowing us to plan for the future. And then also inspiring other communities to take action. Milwaukee is going to spearhead for a lot of these public policies and ways that we can inspire other regional municipalities and agencies and organizations to actually start changing their actions to relate to climate change.
So about a year ago, the city started the climate action plan process. We hired a consultant, The Good Company. They're from Eugene, and along with their subcontractor, Enviro Issues. I think you've been working with them on our comprehensive plan. So they formed our climate action plan team, consultant team, and we went out into the community to build a climate action plan committee. And we ended up getting a committee of about 17 members from the community and businesses that were part of that climate action plan committee. We formed that committee in early January of this year. And then in February, we had our first meeting, our first climate action plan committee meeting. We ended up having a series of 4 meetings, a town hall summit in May. And then over the summer, we worked on drafting the climate action plan. We also, we also had a series of implementation workshops where we brought in experts in different fields, from building energy and fuels and fleets and material resources and recoveries and natural resources, emergency preparedness and public health. So we had a series of actually 6 workshops that we had in February and March, and we met with them. And they actually helped us formulate the strategies that we brought into the climate action plan. And then the climate action plan committee went through and reviewed it and reviewed those documents, and we made some revisions and some adjustments to the strategies and actions that we outlined in the plan. So like I said, during the summer, we went through and drafted the plan. We had a community engagement process as well, where we had an online survey available for community members to take a look at and review. And then in early October, the City Council adopted the plan. And then about a month later, I hired Natalie to help assist in the implementation of the plan. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, just before we get going along, so our early adoption strategies have really been focused on external outreach. So we've been updating our website to get that up and running. You may have gotten an email last week. Do we? No? Okay. I'm not sure how the Planning Commission works in terms of the emails, but we've got a new website updated now with our climate action portal. So we're working on that external outreach. We're also doing an internal engagement process to work with our city staff to develop a consistent message that we can use in our day-to-day business. And we'll be having a meeting with the consultant there to help us facilitate that process. So I'll turn it over to Natalie a little bit.
So if you've taken a look at the Climate Action Plan, this infographic is kind of related through it, but these are our main goals. So by 2035, net zero electricity for buildings in Milwaukee. So that means we're going to be on renewable energy for all of our buildings. That's going to ramp up in 2040 to include natural gas and account for natural gas combustion. So we're going to go down to net building energy emissions to zero by 2040. And then by 2050, we're going to be a carbon neutral city. So that means that we're going to be either reducing, using renewables, or offsetting our carbon through mitigation or sequestration actions. Good timing. So in the Climate Action Plan, there's 53 city-led strategies. So that covers 6 different topics, and we've broken it down here for you. So I'm going to pass it to you. Building energy and efficiency, vehicles and fuels, land use and transportation planning, materials use, purchasing and recovery, natural resources, and public health and emergency preparedness. I just want to comment, so there's mitigation actions, adaptation actions, and sequestration actions. Mitigation actions are what actions can we take to help slow down the process of climate change and slow down those impacts. Adaptation actions are essentially saying, we know this is going to happen. How are we going to change our actions and our lifestyle to match the changes that are going to occur? So stuff like it's going to get hotter, it's going to get brighter, so we should add in more shading. That's an adaptation. And then there's sequestration, which is actually us trying to capture carbon from the atmosphere. So that's through planting trees, green spaces. And so that can actually reverse some of the science behind the climate change, right? So it's going to be capturing some of that carbon. And one thing I really wanted to point out in here, as the planning committee, building energy and efficiency and land use and transportation and planning accounts for almost half of all of these actions. So you guys, your work is going to be immensely valuable to us implementing our goals and strategies, so which is why it's super important that, you know, if you have any questions and stuff, that you can come to us and you have resources available to you. So in the Climate Action Plan, you're going to see for each of these topics a section. And each section is going to have a table that kind of looks like this for adaptation strategies, mitigation strategies, as well as, I think, natural resources has one sequestration strategy. So this infographic, how it's supposed to be read is so the action is on the left side. So these are specific actions, those 53 city-led actions that we've outlined. Next to each action, you're going to be seeing little icons for how we're going to be implementing it. So this is going to be through law or code, city operations, and so you'll be seeing those repeated through for each strategy. Time scale is next to it, so how are we looking in terms of time? It's just really rough, but how are we looking at implementing these? And then the potential greenhouse gas reduction is next to it as well. The cost and savings per metric ton of carbon dioxide equivalent reduced. So right now you can see the red on there, which actually means the cost, right? So we're going to be paying into some of these actions. Some actions actually give us savings. So solar panels, community solar, you're going to be seeing green dollar signs next to it, showing that we're actually going to making some back. And then the really most important part is on the very right, that co-benefits, right? So co-benefits are benefits that we're not necessarily planning on, but other reasons why these actions are important. So that's stuff like equity, other sustainability goals, recreation, transportation. And that actually is our strongest argument when bringing some of these actions. And that's hopefully something that you guys can also bring to people, is showing them how these co-benefits can also support the reason behind why we want to take these actions and implement them in the way we do.
If I can just add, so that first action up there is our SAFE, the city SAFE program. So, you know, we're building out our pedestrian and bike facilities throughout the community. So we identified that as an action that's part of our climate action plan. So that implementation scale, so there's a long period there that we've identified over 8 years. It's actually a 9-year program currently that we've identified. So, you know, it's an extended, long process to get that infrastructure built. And then, as Natalie mentioned, there's those other co-benefits above and beyond just the greenhouse gas emission reductions. There's those other ones as well, so.
So even though we're implementing all these actions, we have a lofty goal, which I think we can meet, but there's also going to be a gap. So right now, we're ahead of the pace to reach our 2050 goal. But as you can tell by that dashed line is where our goals are, where we want to be by 2050. The line underneath it is where we are in forecasting, and you can see that there's a 27% gap for us to close. Now, what that means is that city-led actions, at least is how far that we can have the data to support, can only get us so far. That means that stuff like residential and community and commercial actions need to come into play, and they need to help us out to make that goal. I wanted to pull out that there's a 7% gap in building and energy goals, building and energy efficiency, meaning that by city-led actions, including regulations, regional policies, things that we do ourselves as a city of Milwaukee, we get really close. And there's just 7% that the residential and commercial needs to step it up. But for land use and transportation planning, there's a 91% gap. Now, that could be because land use actions generally take a longer time scale to show effects, right, for carbon. It can also mean stuff like there's a lot of individuality, a lot of commercial and private reasons behind transportation. So how can we better influence those participants and those members of the community? And that's where you guys will come in as well, is to really help us start to make these changes and influence others. So as Peter mentioned, we've done a lot of work so far. So there is the household and business versions of the Climate Action Plan. So if you guys take a look at the Climate Action Plan, it focuses on city-led strategies. There's also one that's focused on business strategies and one that's focused on household strategies. So there's resources for everyone. There's a really great brochure as well for people to pass out for the household strategies. And it essentially just shows like what a home can do to make a change in terms of climate. So those are actually available now on our new website, MilwaukeeClimateAction.com. And that's a little clip of it right there. And so we have a portal essentially for people to come and access those resources, and also where they can come with questions. And there's going to be some fun things on there as well, a little engagement. We're going to have climate champions, climate news, and we're hoping to expand it in the future as well. Recruit and hire climate action sustainability coordinator. Hi there. Doing great. So then develop external engagement strategies to raise awareness and encourage households and businesses to take action. So we're kind of in this process right now to just share the resources, really hear what the community needs and where can we step in to actually help them bridge that gap for us. Where I bolded the last two because this is where I really think you guys come in. So we want to develop messages, talking points, and resources that enable staff to speak out about and advocate for climate action plan goals in their daily work for the city. What I see in that is we need to get you the resources you need to better support your work and to support climate goals in your work. So as Peter mentioned, we're going to be holding an internal stakeholder meeting. We're going to be inviting members of planning to come and really talk to us about what materials are beneficial. Where do you guys see integrating climate action plan into your work? If you have any suggestions, please email me, please call me, and we're going to make sure that we get those to you. And then the final one is develop action plans for institutionalizing climate action plan strategies and messages into our daily practices. So we want to make sure that climate consideration is really ground into what we do. And so every single step that we take, every policy that we make is, it really relates back to climate, and we consider it in Milwaukee, and it makes it something essential to our city government, because I think it will make us unique in the future, but it also has a really big, important part of the future. So yeah. And then, oh gosh, I didn't do that. There we go. So if you have any questions, please send me an email, climateaction@milwaukeeoregon.gov. That is going to be the inbox for climate questions that I'll let you do. That's available on the website. So if members of the public have any particular questions, they can direct that, and they'll actually reach a suite of different people who are going to look at that inbox and answer them. But my personal information is down below. And like I said, if there's anything that you guys need in terms of materials or resources, we're here for you.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments or?
I would like to make a comment. Natalie, I see you again. Peter, as always. I just want you to know that, as always, you can lean on citizens as well to help you out. There's a great group called Milwaukee Environmental Stewards Group that would be more than willing to help hand out information or do whatever information. And I truly believe that the Climate Action Plan is so important that it should be a document that is inside our comprehensive plan. The whole document, no matter what the land use is, because I think that it's, even if you don't believe in climate change, it is at least an energy efficiency and cost savings production manual that can be used by every citizen, not only to help save our environment, but also to save you some money in the long run. And so it is just a truly remarkable document. I'm proud of the work that has been done. I've read it back and forth, and I've even used it to justify to ask for something before. So I think that it's such an important document that it should be in that comprehensive plan so that we can refer to it as part of our documentation and work that we do.
Can I ask a question? This is a discussion, right? Like,
Sure.
Okay. So I think along those lines is, while it's not required by state law, to kind of build on this thread here that Greg started, does it make sense to have something that, we have the transportation systems plan, we have other land use planning documents that are referenced or things are triggered at certain points. Is there a way to think about incorporating this, even though it's not legally required by Department of Land Conservation and Development, that we could have a similar kind of document?
I think that's partly what we were thinking about with the climate and energy section of the plan, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. And that sets up a framework for this more nimble plan, an action plan to carry out. So if there's something we're missing in the policy framework that we're talking about, we should talk about it. We should talk about how do we bring that in, elevate it up to the comp plan. But again, the comp plan primarily deals with land use and transportation elements. It can also deal with some other areas as they sort of relate to that, what we have sort of control over. It doesn't necessarily fall down into how does the city operate or implement certain actions. Like, the comprehensive plan doesn't necessarily need to talk about how Public Works will carry out its energy conservation mechanisms for, converting its fleet to electric vehicles. That's an action that is carried out by this document, by the Climate Action Plan, not the comprehensive plan. So the more appropriate policy, I think, at the comp plan level is, to be directing and the city to do a more broader, general strategy for climate action. We don't need to get real specific.
Well, and I guess, so I haven't had time to read it all the way through and study it. I will. But I did notice that it will be reviewed and updated every 5 years.
That's correct.
And so I think, in terms of using, it's a document that can help us evaluate what we're doing and the effectiveness of what we're doing. It can evaluate some policies that are related to it and comp plan specific kinds of things. So it's a reference document that will be updated with this time frame of 5 years, and that can help spur additional changes or corrections or, adaptations or whatever. So I like that. I like that it says every 5 years it'll be updated, so.
These are the actions, ideally, what we would have done is had the vision, the comp plan, and then certain action plans to carry out policies in the comp plan. This was such a high priority for the council that they pushed the the climate action plan ahead. They did the same thing with the housing affordability strategies. So we're in a position where we're now sort of backfilling the policies. Think about it that way.
yeah.
You know?
But that has advantages,
And
I think.
Yeah.
The transportation element of the comp plan is going to enable the city to look very differently at the next iteration of their TSP. Because their TSP now is from 2013.
yeah,
The prioritization processes and the way that they, align the federally constrained projects as the projects that can be funded, we can very differently look at that in accordance to the climate action plan and what we put into the comp plan for the next iteration of TSP. I think that's actually an advantage for us, rather than try to do it all in say, the TSP. And so we have a kind of a unique opportunity, I would hope, to act with that broad framework, but that then will change probably the way we do, and I'm thinking of the TSP,
Yeah,
of course,
right,
but
right.
there's other plans and
Sure.
sub-area plans and elements that I think would have the same opportunity is there because of this enabling framework. And then I think we go bolder in the comp plan because of the order of it, actually, I think.
If I could add one thing to that, you mentioned the TSP. So we're also working on our water master plan and wastewater master plan. That'll tie into the facility plan. So as part of that scope of work, I've identified a climate piece
Good
in
to
those
know.
plans as well to make sure that we're looking at that infrastructure and how it relates to the climate changes as well. So we're trying to capture those things
Great.
in there.
And I do hope that everybody that walks in with a permit gets a gigabyte drive, not only with all of the land use rules, but also with a climate action plan that says, here, this is so important to us that we want you at least have a copy of it so that when you start designing your building or start implementing the build, that you look at the actions that we've wanted, that citizens would like to see the city and others take, and so that they have a copy of it right in front of their face. And gigabyte drive, not paper,
how about a reference to the website?
or a reference to the
Yeah.
website.
So even if that's a resource,
Getting
any
there.
sort of like pamphlet, just let us know and we can definitely make something like that.
I have a question for these guys. The presentation said there was a 7% gap in building, but a 91% gap in land use and transportation. What does that mean? I didn't understand what that gap would be.
So when you take the strategies, and the consultant went through a process where they evaluated what were the greenhouse gas emissions related to those strategies during a certain time period. So in the building and energy pieces, the strategies that we identified there have a shorter, a quicker turnaround in terms of providing greenhouse gas emissions. We're going to see a larger piece happen there because we're shooting to be by 2035 to be renewable. Some of the land use pieces, as Natalie mentioned, they actually have a longer time frame to provide that benefit, those greenhouse gas benefits. So it takes longer to realize those greenhouse gas benefits, but it puts the community in a better position out in 2050. See, we really only scaled the benefits. We didn't scale the benefits all the way out, indefinitely. There was a certain time frame there. So that 2040 piece.
Okay.
So that's what it is. Those land use ones.
So by 2040, we have accomplished 93% of our target, and that's all we need to do. But by 2040, we're only going to be at 9% of our.
No, so that's those are just related to the land use.
Right. Of the
greenhouse
savings,
gas
but of the
emissions.
savings, savings is the right word, but if reductions that are attributed to land use. Is that what it is? You're only 9% there by 2040?
Yes, in terms of, yeah. But the aggregate of all of the actions get us to actually 73% by 2040. And then it sort of tails off, and it's hard to, we didn't scale it past that timeframe.
I guess I'm having trouble picturing what 100% looks like in this.
Right, so the 100% is to carbon neutral, so in comparison to our, Milwaukee, 50% of 520,000 metric tons, so 260,000. So as Peter mentioned, it's hard because the time scale for each of these is a little bit different in terms of greenhouse gas contributions. But then also these are city-led strategies. So a lot of the actions that come through energy and building energy for the city of Milwaukee, we can control as city of Milwaukee, right? We are
Yeah.
going to be through regulation and policy. Through some of these things, we
Yeah.
can start making reductions.
Transportation's tougher.
And so for land use and transportation, for city-led strategies, we can really promote a lot of these, but for accountable greenhouse gas reductions, it's really hard for us to commit to say we can reduce this amount if it's something like personal transportation that's contributing to, because that's accounted in that $520,000 metric tons. So it's kind of just, it's difficult for us to account for that, so we didn't say that we were going to do it. And that's why there's a big outreach component of the climate action plan, is really trying to convince residents and businesses to actually bridge that gap that we can't account for through city-led strategies.
Okay,
Hopefully
I
that
think I
makes
get it.
Yeah, I mean, and the benefit, like, the plan actually discusses it and shows there's a chart in there that talks about the land use and transportation planning pieces. And there's a sentence in there, the benefit of those policies and strategies continue to unfold out into the future in terms of providing the benefits. It's just in that time frame that they're not all there. Yeah.
Okay. I think I understand. It's just like I'm going to try it a different way. It's like we really only have control over about 9% of the total through the land use and transportation piece.
Through city-led strategies,
Yeah.
yeah. And a lot of it for land use and transportation relies on private and commercial and
Fleets,
individuals.
they're a big producer of greenhouse gas. And you may know, we're not tracking well to our state legislation mandate for
Right.
greenhouse gas emissions targets. We are trending wrong. We're not going to make it
Federal
unless we
government isn't helping.
change things radically.
But yeah, so I mean, if there's also any questions and stuff, we're here
Cool.
and happy to answer and explain and sit down too.
Sounded like you were going to ask.
It's
No,
all
you're
right.
trying to explain to Denny.
No, I wasn't
Okay.
going to explain it. I guess my question is that if 50% of it comes from residents' buying habits, the strategy, of course, is to buy local, but not everything can be produced in Milwaukee.
Right.
So what is the overall strategy to change consumer habits to reduce that?
So that's a great question. So the Climate Action Plan targets the inside Milwaukee boundaries because, at least for the city-led strategies, that's what we can start to control. The outreach component doesn't. So I think that's part of my responsibility, is to talk to people and start just, putting the bug in their ear of, when you click something and buy something on Amazon, it doesn't just arrive to your doors in 2 days with no impact. So I think definitely consumer behavior is something that we need to talk about. Influencing people, such as, I actually just listened to a great article that was talking about not buying rush shipping. Do you really need that in 2 days, or can you actually produce a more efficient truckload of goods by extending your shipping dates? Just things that you wouldn't typically consider as a consumer. And so I think that's going to be a component of the outreach, because, yeah, you're right. Some, people want things that don't exist in Oregon, but maybe starting to support companies that can provide them those goods through renewable, like electric vehicles, or just even considering how much that object is in demand, and other ways we can either get it, or just how you can balance it out. Because you're right, it's a big world, and people are going to want to buy things from outside Oregon. But yeah, just being smart when shopping, I think. think. And the outreach component for my position, I think, is going to deal a lot with that, especially when it comes to Milwaukee communities.
So are you working with the high school?
Hopefully. So where I just started, but I'm hoping to start reach to a bunch of communities. I know that outreach and engagement, so we're going to want to target all audiences, which includes, youth and high school aged individuals who are going to be start
right.
to solidifying some of these behaviors. They're also a great target to talk to about electric vehicles, because a lot of times they're more progressive in thinking in terms of transportation, and they actually want to rely on public transportation, Lyft, Uber, a lot more. So I think they can be really strong advocates for climate change and policy. And I really do hope to go talk to them soon and start to make these connections, and maybe even provide some sort of educational resources for the classrooms so they can start bringing a little bit of climate change action into their own homerooms.
I think that's great. And I know personally, having a high schooler, I would really love to have a resource at home and, to try to use the student to impact household behavior. And teach the older parents that don't really know all the new stuff. So I think that would be, high on the list in terms of trying to build relationships there.
Yeah, I definitely recommend taking a look at the household strategies climate action plan. It's simplified down a little bit, doesn't have each of the strategies broken down how we do it in the community climate action plan, but it's really great resource to look at and see how you can break it down into the different areas. Peter and I even had a great conversation on our way over here about Christmas lights, and how people don't think about holiday festivities and energy consumption. And so, if anything, it's a great topic to start talking about and having these conversations around the dinner table.
That's how I convinced my wife that I won't ever have Christmas tree lights. It's just a waste of energy.
Well,
When the Christmas lights go up before Halloween, it's when it's
Yeah.
really kind of troublesome.
definitely.
Any more questions at this point? It sounds like you're willing to talk individually or come back and talk with us some more. I think that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
I will say, though, really two of the big strategies in here are focused on our utility partners, are focused on PGE and Northwest Natural. So advocating and lobbying with PGE to change their generation portfolio to have a more renewable resource. That's what they're working on. They've got if you go online and look at their website, they have a decarbonization plan that they've identified, and they want to be by 2050, 80% renewable. Well, we want to push them even farther to be 100% renewable if they can be. And then Northwest Natural, a little bit tougher for them. The commodity that they sell is a fossil fuel, but they're looking at different opportunities on how they can provide energy, whether it's hydrogen or some other form of energy as well.
Well, that and they burn off just as much as they ship is what they, bring into the ground. They burn a lot of extra chemical that can be, right, methane, a lot of methane, is that what they burn up? That can be bottled and sold or can be used as an alternative energy.
Bam.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. And welcome again, Natalie.
Yeah?
Thanks. I'm excited.
Here we go.
Welcome to the zoo.
Well, it's been a great group of animals, so.
All right. Another work session item, a comprehensive plan update on Block 2 policies. David?
All right. Thank you, Chair Travis, Commissioners. David Levitan, Senior Planner. I also have Planning Director Danny Egner and Assistant Planner Mary Heberlein, who worked on all of these policies as well. Danny focused primarily on the Willamette Greenway policies, Mary on the Parks and Recreation policies, and then I was kind of the main author, kind of turning the public input into policy language on the natural hazards and the climate change and energy policies. So I would invite both of them to chime in on their respective sections. But I'm just going to give a brief update on the Block 2 goals and policies. As a reminder, the four topic areas are Willamette Greenway, Parks and Recreation, Natural Hazards, and Climate Change and Energy. A good segue from the previous presentation, we decided to really get into the issue of climate change. It's not anywhere covered within the statewide planning goals, but it's obviously a very high priority of this city council and the city as a whole. It's been brought up on numerous occasions. It came up in the vision. And so we were really looking for an updated comp plan that reflected those community priorities. So our Block 1 topics, we had started this process back in the late fall of 2017, really in early 2018 is really when we got into the Block 1 policies. We pinned those down by resolution back in August and then transitioned on to Block 2. Over the last about 4 months, we've really been working on the development. The first few months were focused on community outreach. We had a town hall back in October that was attended by more than 100 people. We had an online open house that generated over 100 comments and visitors. And then we've been out to the NDAs to talk about various things related to the comp plan, including the neighborhood hub concept that Denny had mentioned before, that is kind of running concurrently to that. And so we really feel that we've gotten a pretty good cross-section of comments, different types of groups that have, provided the input necessary to draft these kind of first draft of policies. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. Following the public engagement that we did back in October, staff took a first crack at developing the draft policies that are included in Attachment 1. We met with our technical advisory group last Monday. That's made up of primarily department heads, including Peter, the Public Works Director, Alma Flores, the Community Development Director, planning staff. Natalie Rogers was involved with that review as well. And so we got some really good feedback on that and revised those policies, and that's what's included in Attachment 1. And what we would really like to go over tonight is just give the Planning Commission an opportunity to weigh in. We'll be discussing these with the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee next Monday, as Denny brought up at the beginning of the meeting. And then we will be reviewing them with the City Council on December 18th. And so what we're really looking for is, and I just wanted to point out that Commissioner Edge was not able to attend tonight, but he had provided his comments in writing, very good substantive comments, really appreciated those. And so I passed those out to the commissioners tonight as Attachment 2. And really, that's kind of the level that we're looking at. We would really like to know, are there kind of major issues that we're missing? Is there specific language within any of the goals and policies that you really think needs to be added or deleted or revised? And with that being said, I'd be happy to just kind of jump into it. We can start with any particular topic area that you'd like to. Or we can just go kind of in order as they appear in Attachment 1. So,
Chair, if I may,
Yes,
is your game plan to go over them one by one, or
no, basically we would like to know if there are kind of ones with, I would like to go basically by topic area, and if there are ones that really jump out, if there are things that you either feel are missing that we need to add. I don't think we need to go by them one by one, especially if you don't have any comments on them. I'd obviously, especially with your last meeting going until 10 o'clock, you probably don't want to be here till 10 o'clock again. But we're really looking for kind of those major issues that you really think that we need to address, things that we can discuss with the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee next Monday, and that we can bring up with the City Council on December 18th, as far as these are some of the priorities and the issues that were pointed out by the Planning Commission.
So what do we want to start with?
well, why don't we just
Greenway, parks,
start with natural hazards, since that's first.
hazards, okay.
And then my number one question is, what is liquefaction?
Liquefaction? Yeah, it's basically when you have an earthquake, it's kind of essentially solid ground, basically turning to something that's not so solid, and so you have the risk of it basically
We're all going to sink.
You
becoming fluid.
YouTube it, Google YouTube liquefaction, and you'll see. It's if you recall
It's a loose soil landslide.
No.
It's just, it is a solid soil that shakes and becomes almost liquid, where if there is a building on it, it will move and float around or sink.
Oh, all right.
So it basically looks like a river. You'll have what was essentially solid ground that quickly becomes a river of
If you-
various debris.
If you, I mean, what I think of is that San Francisco earthquake years ago with the, whatever year that was, with the.
88.
88, yeah.
Or was it
88, yeah.
89?
89.
That one, there was a district, part of that district in San Francisco, there were buildings that just sort of sank. The first floor dropped down into the ground, and it was kind of it's crazy, but that's like the first time I'd ever heard of it. But if you Google it and go on YouTube or something, it's crazy.
Yeah, some of the recent events in Southeast Asia especially just have kind of just crazy video available where you can see essentially what happened in some of these large-scale events.
Buildings just moving downstream, but there's no stream. It's just, yeah.
Okay.
Do you want- I have
Just
some.
keep going,
I
yeah.
have
You
some
got, I see
specific-
your list right there.
So 7.1.2, I believe that during the talking points, we were actually, and it was brought up, I think, at the citizen meeting and also inside the CPAC group, was that maybe when we require the submittal of detailed technical reports, I'm assuming that is for private or land developers, either public or private, to submit to the city. And there was talk about, well, maybe they could, instead of them hiring somebody, that they would pay a fee, and the city then would go out and go find a neutral party to decide these kind of things. Is that what that is kind of referring to, or is that?
I think it's inferred that it would be a similar process to our natural resource review now, where they would be required to, they're required to hire someone to do their natural resource review, and then the city has someone that essentially reviews that report. I think that what the CPAC and others were getting at is to make sure that there was someone kind of impartial to review that work, to just not rubber stamp, hey, this is a professional engineer that signed off on this, a civil engineer that signed off on this, or a geotechnical engineer. They wanted to kind of ensure, and so we could be that prescriptive or that specific in the language. I think that's something that's implemented through the development code more than the comprehensive plan. But I mean, we could potentially get more specific if needed, if you felt it needed to be.
And in 7.4.3, you say coordinate with regional, state, and federal agencies on disaster preparedness efforts. I'd like to add in local, because then that could include CERT, or it could include, residents of Milwaukee or something like that on preparedness. I just think that the word local in there just kind of broadens the scope a little bit without it making, that we have to go for outside help when there might be inside help.
Right.
And along 7.41, so I made a list of yeses on Commissioner Edge's comments, and I agree with his statement on 7.41 that you should, instead of just support efforts by city or public land trust, that you could include public and private. And that, right, he's right, land trust may just be land trust, but, include the private sector in that too, because they may own the ground that's there and they can do something else with it as well.
Did you want to comment on something?
I did have a comment before we move off of natural hazards.
Oh, okay.
But yeah,
I mean,
wait for.
if you want to comment on something he's saying, then we could do that too.
It's not.
Not related, okay.
Not redundant or directly related.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm done with my natural hazard
Okay.
portion.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify for me, David, the goals are up for debate as much as the policies
They
are.
are, yeah.
The number of goals. And okay, so goal 7.4, adaptation and mitigation. Everything in there works for me, but I feel that it's kind of redundant with the other 7.1, 7.2, and 7.3, that these aren't, there's nothing specific about the 7.4 series that is adaptation and mitigation that I think could be slotted under 7.1, 7.2, or 7.3. So it just feels like a little grab bag tacked onto the end when all of the others are also about adaptation and mitigation. So I think you could pretty easily slot the 7.4 series in elsewhere.
Okay.
CERT being partnerships in education, the 7.4.5 fits under really goal 7.2. 7.4.2 also fits under 7.2. Many of the others fit under 7.1.
So consolidation.
Consolidate, yeah, I feel like there's an opportunity to consolidate, make it more concise and a little less redundant maybe.
Great. Well, thank you.
Commissioner Argo, anything on natural resources?
I'm checking what.
Natural hazards, sorry.
Are you watching liquefaction YouTube videos
No,
over there?
I know about liquefaction. It's a scary thing.
Mr. Argo, why you'd think, do you mind if I make a comment as well? So we had in the community outreach a whole bunch of maps thrown at us, and one of them was the landslide areas.
Mhm.
And so, for example, my property was in this landslide area, and when you start to look at it, I guess it was generated maybe by hill or whatever. The only potential of a landslide in my backyard is that if my self-made retaining wall breaks, because of the way that the land has been developed, it has been cut and lifted, so it's not one big sloping hill anymore. It is a series of cuts because of the way that the land has been done, and everybody's yard is like that. So. I guess I have a precautionary tale, and it's the same problem that I have with the wildlife habitat, how it's designed. Some guy on Google Maps saw trees and streams and drew a line. I just don't want, I would appreciate that if we produce a map that is going to be a hazard map, that it be looked at on the ground and verified, I guess, if we're going to be putting restraints and rules on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can totally understand that on the on the natural resources side of things, there definitely are properties where you can tell that, there are paved areas that show as natural, habitat conservation areas that, were largely based off of, LiDAR, Google,
Well,
or
streams,
aerial imagery and things
or
like that.
or water
And so-
runoffs that dump into the street that aren't a continual part of a stream flow. That's another,
Yeah.
there's some habitat there, but it's certainly not fish habitat.
So you're wanting to ground truth kind of the landslide hazard areas,
If you're
especially
gonna
if they're
put-
going to have an impact on development rights and
Right,
things
if you're
like
going to
that.
put, if you're going to put some rules or some barriers in there, you just can't rely on what Google Maps tells you or what a topography really tells you. You should get some boots on the ground and just kind of check it out.
Yeah, I'm not 100% certain where we're going with this, to tell you the truth, because if we're really going to do more, I think that map highlights some additional areas, but most of our earthquake and slope hazard elements are caught by the building code.
Yeah.
The building code has some thresholds for when you have to do these different technical studies. And what I think we still need to explore, is there a gap between what the building code requires and what we think ought to also have those types of technical studies. Interestingly, today's codes call for technical studies on mapped areas that have unstable soils. And it's a large map and it covers lots of community, and the staff has never done it. I mean, we've never said to a developer, oh, you have to do a technical study in this area because you're in an area of unstable soils. The building official has, when the building is multi-stories or a public building, if
Interesting.
it's a house,
Okay.
they don't have to do it.
Okay.
So there's a gap, there's a problem in the code today, and we still need to kind of work out some of that about how we protect these areas or what we do about it. And I
So
think
that's
that,
7.1.2.
Well, it ties
yeah,
into
yeah.
that, kind of.
Yeah, but it ties directly into
Yeah.
what Greg was talking about with the maps. How when do you require that study? Is the building code study enough? Are there areas that the building code is missing that we should be looking at? The maps that were used many years ago were not nearly as good as the maps that we have today that were done by Department of Geology and Mineral Industries. They use LiDAR. Is one of the things that they skip, and it's not a huge hazard for Milwaukee because we don't have a lot of big steep slopes. But in a lot of areas, the things they never captured, they capture the slope, but they wouldn't capture the toe of the slope, where if there is a slide, that slide goes out and wipes out whatever's at the bottom of the slope. The new maps do that. And the new maps were sensitive enough that they could catch areas that had historically slid, where you'd have a slope and it would settle out, and then maybe another slope. You know, it might show this area as being a hazard and this area being a hazard, but that area in between is not being a hazard, but it had slid at some point, you know? So again, we don't have enough sloped areas to where that's a huge issue, but I know that when the LiDAR maps came out for Lake Oswego, you could see areas that, were problems, and they didn't show up on the historic maps.
Mm-hmm.
Long explanation for a
And
point.
the maps themselves are not adopted into the comp plan.
Oh, I think we'll adopt them as background maps.
Okay.
I think-
And then as things change and technical information is available or updated, then they're amended, the comp plan is amended to...
Well, we should adopt, if we're going to use them as a regulatory tool, we should adopt them much like we have a natural resources map. It
Yeah.
should be the hazard map,
Okay.
and then you'd update that map as you go forward.
So that's the plan.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's the plan. We haven't talked a lot about the implementation component yet, but yeah, I think that's kind of the way I was thinking about it. But today, the unstable slopes map is supposedly functions as a regulatory map, but we never have used it.
Yeah.
Well, and the Clackamas used to flow into the bay. And so we have a lot of river soil, and especially downtown, there's a lot of sawdust fill. And you found out how sensitive the soil really was when the light rail did their project. I mean, they had to put rubber below the tracks because the ground would vibrate. And so, I mean, there are issues with the soils or finding, what do they call that, a riverbed or whatever you need to find to be able to put a taller building in.
So supposedly, there's a pretty big difference just between where the axle tree site is going in and how far they need to go down to hit rock, and the site that the city owns, the old cash spot site, what are we calling it? Coho, thank you.
Well,
Coho
yeah,
Point. Yeah, so they'll need to go deeper there to hit rock.
While we're on the subject of maps, so on 7.1.2, the detailed technical reports for proposed development within these areas that will have maps that we'll adopt and put in the plan. We have professional people that are doing these now that, I mean, is this something that a developer can acquire, someone to do a liquefaction?
Yeah, it's geotechnical.
It's a
work.
geotech.
It's part of it current.
Yeah,
It could
and
just
Very
be-
common.
And we will just, yeah, it's a geotech engineer would do that type of report, but we're just going to rely on the Dogami maps or the maps put out by by FEMA for floodplains.
I don't want to get way off subject here, but so in Bullfrog Lake, which is out of Oregon City, it was the Street of Dreams 2 or 3 times, Clackamas County, I mean, they had to have geotechs out there, and is that because it's a Clackamas County requirement for a certain amount of slope, or
It
do you
could have
know?
been, it could have been a Clackamas County requirement, it could have been a building code requirement, but statewide planning goal 7 basically says you need to look at where areas have a steep slope, you need to
Oh,
identify them and
yeah, that whole
deal with
thing's a
them.
hill, I guess, so.
Yeah. But again,
Kind of
it was,
unstable.
the way it was done after, with the first set of plans that were done across the state, all they looked at were the slope. They didn't look at the toe. They didn't look at liquefaction issues for floodplains. They looked at where the faults were, where they thought the faults were.
Okay.
I don't have additional
Okay.
comments toward the hazard section.
Okay.
Denny helped answer.
Okay. I mean, we had, at the last CPAC meeting, discussed transfer of development rights. I see that it is called out here, and, I think, my question at the CPAC was, how is that tool currently being used? I don't see a harm in, I guess, including it so that down the road, if it proves to be something that could be used. But I think it seems more maybe in the implementation. I guess I don't know. I'm struggling with it as a policy or having a policy that allows new ways to do it. And that would be in implementation versus calling it out in here.
I think that's true. I mean, it's a complicated policy to
very
use
complicated.
transferable development rights. And we do it today in our natural resources areas only by transferring the density within the property itself. I mean, it's just shifting, it's mostly about the building form, kind of, you could, if your property could get, 20 units spread out across it, and half the property's natural resources, you're supposed to concentrate that density in the area that's not developable, or not a resource.
Resource
So
land.
you could do something similar with hazard areas. And what I mentioned at the CPAC meeting last time, I think, my sort of preconceived notion about how to do that is to allow somebody to transfer the density, not just within their own property, but to adjoining properties. So that you would basically not be suddenly creating this pod of density somewhere else that you hadn't planned for. I mean, the way the pure concept for a transferable development right works is you identify the receiving areas that can receive density
Right.
and benefit from that density. It's complicated. So you got the sending areas and the receiving areas, and you have to go through this process of setting up your whole system to do that. I don't know where the sending areas or where the receiving areas would be in the community.
Well, let's take
Yeah.
the Rusk Road project. There's a permit. Somebody
Yeah,
owns all
right.
that land,
Right.
and then you can say, okay, well, we realize that it's R10 zoning, but for you to stay out of the floodplain and keep it all near the church, we'll allow it to be R2 or, something like,
Well,
right? That would be a transfer.
Yeah, that was more, for their property, it was a little complicated because it was 2 split zones, but say it was one zone.
Right.
The whole thing was one zone.
I'm just trying to use that
And
one
you're-
as an
and you're-
example, to stay out of there, that you could maximize out, or you get in the same amount of houses into a little area
Right.
that you could do in a wide area.
They were actually doing that,
They
using
were
the
actually
planned,
doing that.
the plan development concept as a tool to transfer it. But again, that was applying to their
Own
one
property.
site,
Right.
Right.
you know, and a pure TDR process.
But they could
Chips.
they could have bought 5 or 6 houses, let's say, across the street. Right? And then you could have transferred, for staying out of the floodplain, you could transfer that density over at those other 5 or 6 houses if they were going to tear them down. And
In theory,
Right,
but it
in
would still
theory.
be one application that had to pick
Right.
those up. And I guess by looking at other properties in the immediate vicinity, the street impacts are still going to be similar, because you had already assumed that this one particular development could develop and have impacts on the street. So if the development's happening right in the same area, you're not overburdening a street system somewhere else. I mean, I don't know, it's not a perfect system, it's not a perfect idea, but it might help add some flexibility,
give somebody some choices, at least somewhere along
Yeah.
the line.
yeah,
Possibly, but we would have to have a program.
right.
And that would happen, I mean, I guess by putting it here, that allows for staff time and resources to develop a program
Yep.
that would implement this policy.
That's the idea.
Okay.
Or if somebody walks in the door with an idea.
Or it would provide the basis for using the plan development process to do it. I mean, we could go into the plan development process and tweak some wording to say that this process allows this kind of transfer.
Yeah.
So this is something, I mean, we could definitely bring this up, that just from the perspective of the Planning Commission that has been involved with the review of land use applications and, including in high-risk areas, that, maybe there was some concern about getting into the specifics of it without, fully considering, well, if it's in the policy language, kind of, we're not obligated to, but does it seem like we're providing that direction to develop it programmatically? I mean, we can ask, do they want to have that actual language in there? There was definitely a push from some, and there was also the discussion of kind of natural hazard overlays, and we didn't include that. If we're going to include one, should we include the other? Kind of do it more the way that Portland does it, where they have like their P zones and their C zones, and they have these things really built in directly to their zoning, which would be a very big hall where you really need to be the size of Portland and have, 20 planners that deal with natural hazards. But, yeah. so.
We have taken, we don't have a floodplain zone. We have a separate section of the code that deals with floodplain development. It's administered by the engineering department. And it works just like a floodplain zone, I'll say that. It's like if you're in this area, you've got to deal with cut and fill in the floodplain. It doesn't reduce densities. It's assuming that you can develop in the floodplain, but you have to do certain types of mitigation. And that was kind of what we got into in the Rusk Road project. It was like, well, these guys can fill and develop here. If we want to do something more than that, we may need to implement it in a different way.
Okay. Well, we don't need, I mean, I just was flagging that as something that we had discussed, and it's fine to, I highlight it again at the CPAC meeting. Does anyone else have any comments on natural hazards? Should we move on to climate change and energy policies?
Sure, if we're good with 7.
Yeah, and just as a preface, this obviously was, with the recent adoption of the Climate Action Plan, I think, there was a natural inclination to try to get into action-oriented language, and we weren't trying to replicate, we we're kind of rolling things up
Right.
and trying to identify those priorities that as the climate action plan is updated in future years, this is kind of the policy document that directs that and kind of identifies these higher level policy priorities. And so it was a bit of a difficult process to develop these just because we have this very recently adopted document that, including, many, including our CPAC, were wanting to get language that was very specific, but
Right.
that's not exactly the purview
Yeah.
of the comprehensive plan. So yeah, we'd love to hear your comments.
Okay.
Do you want me to go again?
Yeah, let's start with you.
So I had 13.2.2, and not knowing what last mile solution is. What really bothers me is that is in quotations. So really, what you should do, instead of saying last mile, you should actually define what last mile is. Because with it being in quotations, it seems to me that it is up to interpretation of what that is, no matter what the definition is at the time. So, I mean, it seems like a very loosely used term or whatever. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, we definitely, it's
Do we do a
essentially-
glossary, or will we do
Yeah,
definitions?
we did a glossary with the vision, and I think a glossary will definitely be needed for the
But
comprehensive
the
plan.
quotations is what
Yeah,
really
so-
bothers me. I mean,
Yeah.
But that's common vernacular
It's
in
common, and so
transportation.
it
that is
doesn't
done.
need the,
Really
it's
bother.
common enough, at least within planning vernacular, that it doesn't need the quotation, so.
Okay, all right,
So,
that's
yeah,
fine.
I totally understand the initial reaction to that, though. It does make it seem a little wishy-washy, quote unquote, last mile.
right.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, that's great feedback. It says, as I was writing that one, I wasn't thinking about that reaction to it, that kind of visceral reaction to it, so.
Yeah, and I don't know what it, I mean, it just,
A good,
If I knew
a
what
good
it knew-
example, Greg, is if you take the orange line and you get off Johnson Creek Tacoma Station after 6:30 and you live in Linwood, the bus that goes there does not go there after 6 o'clock, so you're stranded. So Last Mile Solutions is a means of making sure that where you get off on a public transportation, your terminus point, or if you're getting to workplace, you have something that's an option that connects you to get you home or get you to your workplace from using that transit option. So an example could be a shuttle that runs.
Is it meant to be private or public?
It
or
can
just-
be
It
either.
can be either, yeah.
Yeah, it's up to the local community to figure out how they implement such things.
Take it out of quotations, and as long as we have a glossary, that's fine. I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be
Yeah.
defined, but yeah, just take out the quotations.
13.1.9, incorporate climate change criteria into the land use application and development review process. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think so. That's whether it's kind of alternative energy, basically things that could be, when you're pointed to approval criteria, that could be, introduce a climate change component, whether it's through, incentivizing, whether it's through prohibition. I mean, there are different ways that you could do it. Just if we're going to have this climate action plan and we want to actually implement it, when you're doing kind of discretionary review, is there a way to do it? And so this was one, that even internally we had some discussions about and could probably continue to work on that and flesh it out and better describe it. But that was kind of the thought process.
Yeah. I
is a way to kind of implement without implementing, to keep it at policy language, to provide that direction that, hey, we want to be considering these when we're reviewing kind of land use applications and development review, so.
Yeah,
I
see,
just wondered, my thing was, it's just, I don't know if I get it, I like it, I don't know if it necessarily fits in the built environment solely, I think that
I see what you're saying.
just where it falls kind of in the categorization piece, was kind of what stood out for me, because I think there would be transportation, other elements. So,
Yeah, no, I can definitely understand. I mean, if there's a project, that has great access to transit and things like that,
Right.
Has that kind of climate change criteria that you could point to, it's not just within the built environment of the building, it's other aspects of project review. So, yeah, no, that's a good comment. I guess it was trying to figure out where, if we're going to have something like that and you have just a couple of categories where you fit it.
right.
See, because when I kind of look at, my thinking is that, oh, well, in your residential design standards, there's a list of 7 and you get to choose 3. One of those could be, 10 solar panels or whatever, how much BTUs of solar you need to do your house or whatever it is. I can't remember what that number is, but at the same point in time, right, somebody could use it, let's say as a commercial building, hey, I'm going to eliminate my parking
Right.
because I'm putting it right next to a transportation hub. The transportation hub, I'm assuming, will be there anyways, but then the justification for reducing your parking would be, I'm going to give everybody a transit pass.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it does fall, when I look
It's
at
in
it,
the-
it falls into this built environment. And if you say built environment as in the building environment or however you want to say it, you understand what I mean?
Yeah, I understand what you mean.
And we can have such incentivization language in the transportation block when we get to it, I would think, right?
Right, you could either, right.
So that's a
Right,
cool,
yeah.
that's pretty intriguing right
Right.
there.
Great. Well, thank you.
Anything else?
Yes. So 13.2.4, which is reduce barriers to developing alternative energy projects on public buildings and properties. Why don't we also include on private and public buildings and properties?
Yeah, why don't we?
Yeah, it just
Cool.
seems silly to me just to, for the 4 buildings that we have that are publicly owned on this, why not add in the private?
Sounds good.
We incentivize green building, we incentivize an extra floor. I mean, it's already kind of in there, you know what I mean? Might as
Yeah.
well
Yep.
go the full gamut. And then on Commissioner Edge's comments, I agree with his comment on the 13.3. Hold on, I'm not very good at this. On his comment about specific policies is what I'm looking at. The 13.13, I think that he makes a very good point about being a model city. And, I am all for going above the standards without crippling our economy, I guess, or crippling our development. And 13.31, I agree with his language to change it from simple to most effective. I think that's actually a very good language change. One of my worries is that we're going to build this thing and technology is going to pass us by. And so now all of a sudden you're requiring solar, and let's say somebody learns how to build a star in a box. Solar is no longer needed, and so now you're requiring all this stuff that isn't needed. Quantum computing is another one that's going to change the world that we know now. The 13.3.8, I like his suggestion of distributed energy generation. And that's the same thing. If we just spell out solar, right, we could be missing the boat on a lot of things. So we could have a small wind farm, we could have, I'm not against dams or hydrology used for energy, but I know some people are. And I like his concept on 13.310
Yeah.
about triggers. What those look like, I can't even come close to telling you. But, right, if we could build in a mechanism that says, hey, if the population grows by 5% in a year, we really need now to relook at our city and our code and everything else, that we need to dive in deep, because the pressures are going to be so high, or if there's even that demand. I mean, what happens if, Amazon won't, they're in New York and Virginia, but, let's say Google comes in and builds a plant on 32nd and Harrison, right? Now, all of a sudden, yeah, you can build your plant here, but we don't really have the capacity to hold your 300 employees. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
it's
so that
similar to
kind
how
of
you'd
thing.
have to look at your other infrastructure. You're essentially making kind of climate change kind of part of the infrastructure and ability of the city to accommodate growth.
Right, so the idea is that climate change is going to push people to the Pacific Northwest. And so if we see a mass migration come in because of climate change, or whatever the reason is, a trigger or a mechanism to relook at our policies, I think is a great idea.
Yeah, I think I really appreciated that. I think, the sort of tracking these trends a little more closely, and then being able to adapt and modify when you start to see certain trends emerge. I disagree with his supposition that people will have means, that people will be well-resourced, but that's okay.
Well,
Not necessarily.
I'm not saying that,
Part of the point, but
the whole thing
Right.
is,
the idea
you know.
that you would be tracking and monitoring and like.
that you have a
looking for
trigger, right?
Triggers, yeah.
If we get a mass migration coming in, it makes sense to me. We had a 30-year-old policy, and we've been stable at 20,000 citizens forever, right? But what happens if there is a migration that, we get 10,000 more people in here fairly quickly because downtown all of a sudden develops,
Yeah,
let's
it's
say.
not out of bounds.
I mean, we should then relook. I don't know what that is. There's a lot smarter people than me to kind of
Who
figure
were you
that out.
pointing at? Was there somebody behind?
Well, I
you?
noticed he
Mary.
changed when he said that he started
Great.
to
And everybody
point
else.
over here, but then he changed and pointed at you, so that was good.
Must have been somebody in the
In
back
30
corner.
years, you might take over
Yeah.
the throne. You
Yeah.
never know. And then
30
in
years, hopefully I'll be retired, so.
and
Let's
I like
retire.
his 13.311 comment about changing the language to say materials and site development techniques that can mitigate.
I would just like to publicly say for the record that I really appreciate Commissioner Edge and his thoughtful comments.
Yes.
And he adds a lot of value to our commission.
absolutely.
So in his
Without a
absence, I will
doubt.
just state that he's very appreciated and valued.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Anyone else have comments on climate change and energy?
Mr. Burns?
I'm okay.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
I didn't have anything else. Okay.
I think we're okay.
All right, well, let's move on to Parks and Rec.
On Parks and Rec, I think goal 4.1 is, I think, more of a definition or glossary than
Yeah.
a set of policies.
That's what I was thinking, too.
Give you that?
Well, yes and no. There,
You have to adopt the classifications.
well, no, not necessarily. But what it does do is, and this is whether or not this is needed, it sets these parameters or these statements about the sizes and kind of what, we didn't really go to service levels, but it creates
It
some,
helps get you there, though.
some framework for where certain parks ought to go or what types of parks they are.
I see.
Now, but I agree with you. They're kind of definitional, and could you do it as a definition, or is there another policy that's needed that then would refer to the definition somehow or something?
Well,
That would be better. I mean, these are the only policies that aren't a single sentence, and I think at the end of the definition, you have the single sentence that is the policy. So it just struck me as
Yeah, no, I get you.
which one of these doesn't belong.
why don't you,
Yeah.
why don't you just add goal 4.1 as 4.3.6 and just say utilize parking classifications to guide provision of parks and other public open spaces throughout the city.
Well, parking's the wrong word.
He means park.
It's good
Oh,
good
did I-
call.
Nice catch. No,
Park
you got it right.
classifications, yeah. It's a
Oh,
little
yeah,
typo.
I got
We're
you.
used to
Found
using
that.
the word parking,
Bam.
yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right, and then
Yeah.
you can, because that's planning and design,
Yes.
Yep.
or it could be 4.3.1, and then you move all the rest of them down if you want.
Yeah.
Yep,
But
it
they,
could do
do
either.
they really need to be policies? I don't know that they do.
And while we're talking kind of formatting, this one has implementation as a goal. And I guess I was interested in why that one has an implementation goals, and the others don't. Oh, so if you scroll down, 4.5 is implementation.
I think it can be a different word choice if we want.
Okay.
And Alma Flores, the Community Development Director, also thought it could use a different word choice versus implementation. But I'm open to ideas of what that word choice would be.
So it's like, what do we call this category
Yeah,
of things?
because it's not specific in the sense that it's, like implementation programs per se, they're policies, but this is kind of how we take these other policies and move forward with them to a certain extent.
Yeah, it's the one section that's saying this is partly how we're going to go forward to implement some of the other policies. And we were looking for a place to say something about establishing a Parks and Rec open space zone. It didn't fit well in the others. So, yeah, it was,
Couldn't you just call it park development?
You don't think it could go under goal 4.3, planning and design?
no, it was about how you manage the park, how you manage parks. And maybe planning.
Planning and design, I mean, it
It could fit within planning and design, I would think.
I would agree.
I mean, not to be nitpicky, but I definitely don't think you should have implementation
right.
called out for one and not for any, if you're going to be consistent.
Well, each one of the, I mean, throughout the entire code, it's a little bit different about what the goals are. And I think that the implementation section here is a little bit similar. It doesn't use the same words, but it's a little bit similar to the, I was going to say adaptation and mitigation section. Not exactly, but it's more about trying to, how you carry out some of the other policies, but
Okay. It's the how,
yeah. Let us,
not the what,
I-
but the how.
Yeah, park development, I think, is a good choice of a word. Because that's basically what you're saying is how are we going to develop these parks, right? That's what your implementation is?
well, not 100%. This was about, let's look at the policies under implementation. One was, it was a mechanics part to it. It was like create a new zone. I don't think it fits very well in the other categories.
Maintaining and expanding the park system.
And, yeah, it's,
Well, maybe just think about it. I think
Yeah, I mean, we
I
don't
think
need to
everybody here just
belabor
doesn't
it.
like the word implementation.
Okay.
So we don't need to.
We know it
Maybe
has
throw it
its
out
own
there.
very discrete function, especially in a planning document or a process.
Yeah.
But I think
I recognize
implementation,
that.
right, has a definition of this is exactly what we're going to do, or something like that along those
It
lines.
definitely confers,
Very prescriptive
It
to
does,
a.
confers a who and a what, usually, of
Right.
action, and a how.
Yeah, and I mean, the verb choice in the actual goal is then implement, so probably want to look at changing that.
So my overall comment on goal number 4 is that we don't include any indoor activities. And so, for example,
That's good.
if you have an apartment complex, do they get some sort of incentive for putting a gym?
Yeah.
Which is recreation and keeping people healthy
Center
and
with
not
the
having them
yes.
travel. The Hispanic population has been talking about wanting an indoor soccer field. Or play areas inside. It rains 9 months out of the year here, so an apartment building puts in a slide and a jungle gym or, something like that in their building.
It's great.
Instead of doing the open green space, yeah, it might only be for those people there, but it, keeps people from driving or going elsewhere to get those recreational needs.
So, yeah, and I think, something about preparing for, providing recreational opportunities for all seasons and also for, adaptation to climate change as well, to kind of tie it into that as far as frequency of events and types of events and, air quality issues, obviously, for indoor as well. So, yeah, that's something that's a great comment.
Okay.
And then I have some Commissioner Edge comments, too.
Okay. On the things that he's called out. I mean, I agree. I mean, with identifying roles instead of the names of the organization as more lasting.
I thought that was good.
That
Yeah.
was good.
Yeah, the 4.23.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Yeah, don't list specific partners. I guess TriMet and the transportation is probably okay. I guess they're,
You can just say transit providers,
transit providers, but
or public transportation providers.
yeah, listing out specific partners can get you in a little bit of trouble. And then in 4.3, his point is right on, that when we think about these green areas, these natural areas and all that, we also need to think about the habitat. And that should be an important component to why we are preserving these spaces. And really, all we do is we look at these park and recreational opportunities as only human enjoyment, but we should also think of them as a place where our furry, feathery friends can live and thrive as well. And if that just and I'm not going to say any more about that, but I think that putting that into the language, I think is important, especially when we get into the natural resources. And if we're talking about habitat and everything else, that we recognize these green spaces as habitat areas as well. But, that was really good thinking on his end. I don't think I would ever come up with that, so. But I strongly support the idea.
Yeah, and it's nice to be able to, reference different parts of the plan and have like consistent approaches.
Right.
So, yeah.
And similarly, he points out how that can be a linkage in policy 4.5.4.
Right, and I have that marked.
That's
yeah.
good, too.
I have another one there is marked as well as one that I like his include natural areas, habitat, and I'm not so sure what, I get what he means by habitat linkages, but it's kind of hard to do in a city, but.
All right, anything else on Parks and Rec, including indoor recreation?
Well, I
I
mean.
love it. I think it's great. It's really good.
You gotta it's not just about
Yeah.
outdoors. Should be also about the
Absolutely.
recreation inside too as well.
Okay, well then, we'll move on to Willamette Greenway, and this is authored by Denny, is that right? Or this was?
Mostly,
Yeah,
but I also, started with the existing greenway policies and looked back at the statewide planning goal, which, everybody did that too, but I was maybe a little bit more literal in pulling from the existing policies. That's why I ended up with 4 pages
you
of.
sure do have 4
Greenway
pages there. That's what- Got a lot of words in this one, Denny.
Yeah, I know.
I think he wore down.
Historic rabbit holes.
He wore down.
Come out,
He wore
'cause
Joseph down. If you look at the number of comments,
Yeah.
he just threw his hands up.
Just say fine.
Do you want to provide any context for this, Denny? Other than what you've just said about how you looked back?
We have some things in the Greenway today that we're relying on some work to be done that was never done. The Greenway Design Plan, which was something that state law allows, and we called out for a Greenway Design Plan to be done. It was never done. But what we have done is done 3 park master plans instead of a Greenway Design Plan, which provide a heck of a lot of guidance for the areas in the Greenway. We don't have that same guidance for the private lands, but, without a plan for acquisition of private lands, or if we wanted those lands to be something else, which we haven't identified in, say, our downtown Milwaukee redevelopment plan, we haven't done that. I don't know if we need it. I don't know if we need the Greenway Design Plan. So the way I treated it here was just to say those existing master plans serve as a Greenway plan. We could, if we may want to do a Greenway plan in the future, it doesn't prevent us from doing it. Fairly flexible, I think.
And so just to throw my 2 cents in on that, I'm going to I think we need to keep it in because I think there are properties down by the river, especially in between Elk Rock Island and Island Station neighborhood. Those properties literally stretch into the normal river plain.
They do.
And so, there is property for, I don't want to say the taking, but it serves no purpose to anybody except.
There's a good chance you're going to see a development plan for
Right,
one of those
and-
properties in the near future.
Right, and so then, there's another swap for density and floodplain, if you wanted to.
The other thing I might mention in 15.1.1 talks about a Greenway compatibility review boundary, and it was, again, something else that's allowed by state law that lets you more precisely define what sort of review you want to occur in certain areas. So we don't have a Greenway review compatibility boundary that's different than the Greenway boundary. And this would basically set up an ability to do a higher level of review close to the river where we think, that review is merited, but maybe give a much lighter level of review further away. You guys have seen Greenway reviews before you where it was like, why are we reviewing this garage that has nothing to do with the water? This was designed to try to eliminate that type of conditional use.
So Denny, help me wrap my mind. When I think of Willamette Greenway, I always think of it as somebody standing at the other side of the shore looking, right? So that you're not blocking the views of the river. Do you understand what I mean by that? And I kind of think of it, or blocking the natural view of the river, I guess.
Well, the Greenway is linear, and it's linear along the river, right? So the Greenway is this area that includes floodplain, kind of sloped areas, treed areas, most public land, and the goals of the Greenway the statewide planning goal, talk about conservation, talks about recreational use, talks about trails. So it was intended at a statewide level to protect the areas along the river for a wide set of uses, actually. But not
But for public lands.
public and private. I mean, it accepts that a lot of those lands are going to be private lands, but they ought to be managed in a way that doesn't have a real negative impact on anybody else or allows you.
Right,
allows
that's why,
views.
I always say, oh, it's the view from the other person across the river.
Yeah, but we don't,
Okay.
we today don't regulate or we have interpreted the current Greenway overlay zone to not really regulate private views. We've only looked at it as views from public areas. And I just think if we get into trying to regulate somebody's private view of the river, it's just, I don't know, I think it could get nasty, you know?
We spent a lot of time talking about that at CPAC,
Yeah, yeah.
just kind of debating the view, what that means.
Right,
and
what's
how
that
do you-
supposed to mean?
Right.
Right. Okay.
What else is in here?
So Denny, why, excuse me, why is there, so goal 15.3 land use,
Yeah,
why is there a section about land use in a land use planning document, I guess, is like,
I think I stole that category from the current plan, but I could be wrong. This was about the levels of, this section is primarily about the land use review process
okay,
within the, I mean, we could add those words.
land use
you know.
review process,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that would be great if we could establish two separate boundaries of the Willamette Greenway is built in 150 feet away from the river or whatever it is by law, right? Or whatever it is.
No, the Greenway is bigger than that, but it says a minimum of 150 feet. And we have areas that are, some areas that are further away that make sense, and some areas that are closer that, we need a map. We didn't include the map with this. We should have done that. We have a map that is sort of a first take at what that boundary.
Right, and Kronberg Park is in there and Kellogg Lake is in the Willamette Greenway.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is, well, right, I agree, but I mean, I like the idea of having low standards 75 feet away from the river or whatever, for small buildings or,
Well, we were doing 150 feet plus a little bit more in a couple areas. And then the areas that were further than that wouldn't have to go through the higher level of review. And the higher level of review, I don't think is much higher than today's. It's just trying to be a little clearer about what's permitted and what isn't.
right, I mean, it seems ridiculous for somebody to have to come in for a hearing for a small garage,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it just,
Anyone else on Greenway?
We include managing Elk Rock Island as a natural area park.
all right, well, hold on. It's Peter Kerr Park, and it's Spring Creek Natural Area.
Thank you.
And I don't know where I don't know if Peter Kerr Park takes up all of Elk Rock Island and some of the Spring Creek Natural Area comes in. I don't know where the land bridge falls on that, but we should be specific with definitions, I guess.
Can you give us a history lesson on
Never
Peter
heard of
Kerr?
that.
I can, actually. He ended
Not
up,
right now. Not right now. We're trying to,
Yeah.
he basically
He's
bought
ignoring
the,
Your gavel.
he lived across the river, bought the land, bought the island in the 30s.
It's a good succinct
And in the
history.
50s, he donated it to Portland.
Oh, really?
See, that's that short.
that was succinct, okay. That's good. I thought you were going to go all the way, like,
I could. I can go 40
Okay.
million,
Yeah.
40 million years ago, if you want me to.
Good.
Yeah, there's a lot of goals in here.
Yeah, goal 15.7 was kind of a, one that was questioned. And
loaded with
it is
goals.
something that was in the current plan.
Did you say
15.7.1 was in the current plan. And we added 15.7.2 to make a distinction there between, ordinary high water, was that right? Were we supposed to change that? I can't remember if it was land below the ordinary high water line. Yeah, I think that's right, the way we got it.
I know in Portland's upriver port areas, that's the definition, because
Yeah.
there's DSL, they're still reviewing stuff about.
Yeah, but that's not, you got private property that is under the ordinary water line on the Willamette.
Can go
Yeah.
barbecue there.
Yeah, you do. But I think DSL has jurisdiction over it.
Yeah, yeah.
I thought it was low water line.
I guess.
That's, we need to check that.
Yeah, we need to check that with
Low
Kelly
water.
Brooks. I know that came up last week.
If
The discussion.
If it's actually the low water line.
I can't remember. But there's also private property that goes beyond the low water line. So,
So is Dogwood Park really in the Willamette View?
Park.
Oh, in the Greenway area?
Yeah, in the Greenway?
Yeah,
Yeah, it extends there. It kind of goes all the way up. It's
Is the
basically
cat-
part of the flood.
By the post office?
Yeah, the one on
across-
top of the hill.
Okay.
Oh, so I see, you take the bowl from the dam, from where the lake used to be huge, where the lake used to be, so you take that bowl area, Kronberg Park, up to the top of that, to,
Yeah, and
Right.
it would be really, as Denny mentioned, if we had a map, but yeah, basically the floodplain for,
okay. all right.
where it extends in.
the
is
floodplain
all-
plus public ownership. So I think Dogwood, I think it is in, and I think it was included partly because it was publicly owned along the
Might
water.
as well add it in.
Yeah.
So Kellogg Lake used to be privately owned. Now it's all publicly owned?
I don't know. I think it's waters of the state. The water is, the land, there might be land there that is privately owned underneath the lake. And I don't know what happens if we take the dam out.
It'd be
Interesting
interesting to
question,
find out.
isn't
Well, Kronberg's donated, well, this doesn't matter.
Well,
Kronberg-
typically, if there's, hydrological connection, it's a water of the state as opposed to like Oswego Lake, which they've obviously been battling over. They're saying that there's no connection, and that's why it can be private and why they can keep everyone
Control all
like
access,
us out.
all access to it.
But at high water, again, when we've got high water, Kellogg Lake's still going to fill up to some degree. 'Cause
Right.
it's- Yeah.
Is there a need for anything, or is there something in here that I missed related to climate change and the Greenway?
Not really.
Future impacts or revisiting boundaries, or, I don't know.
Yeah, so what happens if the water rises a foot? Does that mean that you move your greenway out a foot?
Would that, we're beyond the it would be the floodplain, right? So we include the floodplain and we include along the river boundary itself. I don't think it's going to make any difference. Around the lake, it might make a little bit of difference.
I mean, it's just, I don't know if it needs to, it doesn't sound like it
Yeah,
would be important to highlight anything.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, that's more kind of the hazard component. I mean, it's so closely linked with
Yeah.
floodplain and floodway and all of that.
we've got this 150-foot buffer from the edge of the water everywhere, so, and then we've got some areas where we've taken in the entire floodplain. So I think we're probably pretty good.
Okay.
not to be nitpicky, but did anybody talk to Wes about the language that you're using on the Willamette?
Not yet.
You might want to do that before we adopt it to see if
Right.
they have any questions, because you do kind of specifically
But
spell them out how you want them to better their park.
there is more flexibility here in this language than under the current policies in the plan, which basically say Wes is going to go away.
Right.
So this says, go away or be more,
So is this an opportunity to put something on there like control the amount of overflow waste that,
not in this section, I don't think. I think it might be in the natural resources and public facilities sections.
okay?
All right.
And would this preclude them from being able to expand their tanks?
Currently, the public facilities section says that they can't do that. And we need to have a good community conversation about that. This is basically saying, be flexible and try to, it says accommodate recreational and water-related uses at the treatment plant site. That could be a lot of different things. And then it lists, some of the ways you might want to try to do that. Our intern did a nice little report today that I haven't read yet, but I glanced at, which was about different places that have capped different types of public facilities with a park. Most of them are absurdly expensive and way beyond what we might be able to afford. But on the more simple side is just down here at Tri-Cities, they have a green roof over a facility. So I mean, there is a range of things that one might do.
Hey man, everybody wants a skate park. Go ahead and build one somewhere else. Just drain the thing. Right?
Okay. As we're moving on,
I'm
we've
sorry,
gotten to
Pour some concrete in it.
a point where we need to,
So you saw the mom look, she's ready to.
all right, that's enough now.
Oh, yes.
You guys have any other things you want to add? Okay, all right.
Yeah, thank you.
David?
Yeah, thanks. It's looking good.
So what are our next steps?
Yeah, so we're going to write up just to provide the CPAC with kind of a general summary of your comments. I think Commissioner Edge's comments are a good place to start, and we can kind of supplement those. Don't want to overwhelm them, just kind of some of the major issues that the Planning Commission has brought up, similar to the Technical Advisory Group. And so we'll be meeting with them next week, and then basically refining the policies after that, presenting them to the City Council on December 18th for a work session. And then the plan is to come back in January and to have the CPAC take a final look in early January following the holidays, and then have the City Council pin those down on January 15th. So,
And we'd like to come back to you, or at least get that information to you for the January 8th meeting, except that the January 8th meeting is probably going to be completely filled by the Lake Road, sports fields,
Really?
transportation demand management plan.
Will that include the high school as well?
No.
I thought they had to
Just-
present it all as one plan.
No, they don't have to do it as one plan.
Oh.
They have to do one for the high school as well, but this is the one they want to get rolling right now.
And you're anticipating a big hearing,
Oh, yeah.
lots of
I'm
testimony.
expecting some very strong
There'll be
opposition
fights.
Okay.
to what's been proposed.
Okay.
So we'll see
Right.
what shakes.
so yeah, even if we just provide those, and if you have strong opinions on anything, can
Right.
comment by email.
Yeah.
It's
That sounds good.
possible that we might, that things might get resolved on that plan or it might even get pushed back if there's need for the neighbors and the school district to get together and talk more. But right now, the school district asked that the transportation plan that they submitted be deemed complete and with the target of this date. So they want to have the discussion on this date. And we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
But yeah, it'd be great to have some additional comments at that meeting or around that meeting when we get the revisions made.
Okay. Maybe we can just earmark a little bit of time, not
Yeah,
have a presentation, but just allow for
we
comments.
could probably do that,
We could,
except David would want it to be before the hearing, but that might be okay.
Yeah, I mean, and there will be the CPAC meeting to kind of give the final blessing, and
Right.
so even if all the commissioners want to go out for beers and let Chair Travis know any of their
Yeah, that's a
concerns
good
to bring
idea.
up at the CPAC, then
Yeah, but
that's one
no
route
more
to
than
go.
three.
No.
at a time.
At a time. At a time. At a table.
I'll just stay
Can
there.
it just be at a table? So, not to get technical, how are you going to do the December 3rd? Are you going to do it all in one large group, or are you going to
We
break
are,
them
we're
up?
staying in plenary on that one,
Okay.
so.
Yeah, that's why we needed a follow-up meeting, because there's no opportunity for folks to talk about it. Well, there's going to be questions that'll be asked, but December 6th, but, yeah.
December 3rd,
Oh, December 3rd.
which is
Oh,
the hammer down of these details.
December
That was-
3rd is, we have so many meetings, yeah.
So, and I know I'm jumping the gun on this, and I don't want to jump, but I will not be able to attend December 6th, nor will I be here December 11th as well.
Oh,
And so, if I were here, my questions would be, do we have a strong definition of what affordable housing is?
that I think we have.
And two, that we don't get so lost in affordable housing that we forget the other citizens and the current residents and holding their land value as well. Do you understand what I mean by that?
I think so.
All right, well, you could, maybe
but
you want to provide more in
you
an
could-
email?
That's all I
Email would be
just want
good.
to say.
And it's a little bit more about housing affordability in a general sense than about the technical definition of affordable housing. So that's one thing to remember as we're going forward. We're primarily dealing with a broader range of housing affordability that would work at a number of different income levels rather than what we would technically define as affordable housing.
Right, somebody explained to me affordable housing with a capital A,
Right.
right? Or,
Yeah.
Well, there's affordable housing versus housing affordability. I mean, and housing
Right.
affordability deals with being able to provide a range of housing choices to people that want to live in Milwaukee, and that includes obviously people that have lived here for a while. There are plenty of people that have lived here for 30 years that would not be able to buy their house now, and they've been important parts of the community, and how do you maintain or improve that housing affordability for people that have been longtime staples of the community? So, is part of it as well.
well, and that's why I like in our climate action section that we had, recognizing these policies and the effects that they have on basically the affordability of housing. It's not put that way, but equitability and whatever the other term was.
Great, well, thank you.
So send any comments or questions you might have.
Are you going to tape the December 6th?
I believe we are.
Okay, good, because then I can watch it online and then,
Yeah, they are recording the housing forum, so. I don't know if it's do you
I
know?
think they're for sure doing a Facebook Live event that
Okay.
will be recorded and posted on the
I know that it'll
website.
be recorded and posted. I couldn't remember if it was a live stream or not.
No. I mean, it'll be live on Facebook, on the Facebook
Okay.
page. Yeah.
That's right.
All right, well, we kind of,
Jump
well,
ahead.
thanks,
Yeah.
David,
Thank you, David.
for your good work
Thanks,
and
everyone.
your help with us as we walk through that. We jumped ahead, we kind of started going into updates, discussion items, and forecast for future meetings. We skipped the code of conduct form.
And I think we just printed 3 of them for 3 of you.
Yeah, I handed them to,
Yeah. So we just have to sign it.
If you'd sign them and,
well,
it.
read it and sign it.
Oh, right, yeah, I've read it already. Online.
I mean-
appreciate it. Yeah.
I mean, you can just sign it, but.
it talks
I would-
about,
I would not
just
advise you.
important things like providing 4 beers per month to city staff.
Yeah.
And
My firstborn.
I didn't realize that's what you were handing out when I
Oh, okay.
already
I have
had
one,
so I do
yeah.
need it. Actually.
I have another.
Okay. So we don't need to discuss it, we just need to read and sign it?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, we were,
And then do we have any other planning commission committee updates and discussion items?
not for me.
Covered it.
I have one. December 8th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. is Christmas at the museum. Santa will be there. Admission is free. Come and see the museum decorated in holiday cheer. Take your picture with Santa, bring your own phone. Then there will be light refreshments there as well. And so it's kind of a really good fun time to come and see the museum and enjoy some holiday cheer with friends, and it's completely free. So bring your kids, bring your grandkids, bring yourselves.
Thank you.
What time is that, Greg?
11 a.m. to 3 p.m.
That's cool.
on the corner of Railroad and 37th Avenue.
Look for the big B.
Rain parade
Look for the big
Saturday.
B.
Yep,
That
the
is
big
no
B.
longer a sign, but a monument.
Sounds fun. Yeah, there's lots of things in December.
Rain parade Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
Umbrella, yep.
Or umbrella parade.
Then
It's pretty much a rain parade.
Freezing cold
Christmas
parade.
ships on the
is-
Christmas
14th,
ships,
right?
yep.
We're on the 15th,
17th?
14th.
I don't know, sometime.
The
There's
winter
a-
solstice.
December is very busy.
It is.
Lots of activity. Okay, I think that it's helpful to think about other forecasts. Do we usually just have 2 meetings that we forecast, or I feel like you were putting,
Sometimes we've been able to.
put a little more on there?
More because we're slotted for land use reviews, development
Because
review.
the reason I say that is I think, Peter today, when he was talking about, I forget what he called it, but it was infrastructure planning or facilities planning or something that is happening. I know that Alma has had other plans, and I think just thinking about where it fits to have other folks come and talk about all of these various planning efforts would be really informational and helpful.
Yeah, like the South
To us.
Downtown Plan is another
Yeah,
one that would be.
exactly.
Ooh,
you know?
good one.
So, yeah, when he was talking, I was like, oh my God, there's another plan going on that, I mean, it's
Yeah.
great, but just to keep us apprised of kind of all these different things. It doesn't
Okay.
have to be a huge time slot, but just a little bit of an update, I think, how it fits into schedule would be helpful.
Yeah, and I thought Peter and Natalie's presentation was
Perfect.
great.
perfect, short on time,
Yeah.
They did a
enough
great job.
detail that you get it,
We're in good shape with that.
but not enough detail that it got you lost, except
See,
for Denny.
you ask and you shall receive, though. That came up. It's like, what?
Well, let's ask for like concise, like time,
Got it.
but
Well-
yeah, that'd be helpful.
We've got a number of current planning projects right on the wings, so it's like, we have a lot to do in the spring, and anyway, we'll see how it goes.
Okay,
Right. We need to keep you guys rolling on this stuff, and
a lot of stuff.
okay.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks. I guess with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, adjourned.